Nice Macro Monday, when influencers try out and review Linux. So as you might have heard through the grapevines that Linus Sebastian of Linus Tech, which is one of the biggest channels on YouTube, or as we call him in the Linux community, the other Linus, tried out Linux and kind of reviewed it, I guess, for the first time as a desktop operating system. And while I will confess that I did not see all of his videos, and I only saw in a segment of a podcast where he discusses it with Luke, what his experiences with Manjaro were, and well, he of course discusses many of the user experience things, so some jarring UX or some things that he couldn't do easily in the graphical user interface, and complained about people suggesting to use the terminal for certain things. And while I think the experience, no one wants to say that the experiences that they had are not valid. I just don't really think that we as the Linux community would be that much hyped up when these big influencers pick up a Linux distribution and try to review it, because I don't think we as people who like to advocate for Linux or would like to advocate for Linux, I guess, or just like Linux in general, we cannot just have a good experience with someone big and influential who is not familiar with desktop Linux, just trying it out and reviewing it because of the following things. So first of all, in general, of course, Linux has very different philosophy behind it than Windows and macOS, so things are of course going to be done differently than in Windows and macOS. And I know there are many people who try to always suggest distributions that try to mimic one or the other proprietary operating system user experiences, but there will always be something that's just a little bit different and will frustrate the hell out of the experienced power users. And in general, of course, what I should have started with it, you cannot just try out Linux. You have to choose specifically which Linux you will be using, because Linux in itself is not an operating system. And GNU/Linux is also not an operating system in itself. You are using Arch Linux, you are using Gentoo, you are using Ubuntu, you are using Manjaro, you are using Pop! OS. So you have to choose one of these Linux-based operating systems, I guess. So your review will only be specific to that operating system. And while in Linux you have the freedom to choose from a very perplexing variety of graphical user interfaces, desktop managers, desktop environments and window managers, that's the two words, or rather expressions. And, when you as a big influencer will just try out Manjaro with KDE Plasma, that experience will not translate to someone using the classic Ubuntu with GNOME, or, I don't know, Pop! OS with their Pop! Shell, or whatever they are calling that. And many people won't really, get the difference if you don't explain it properly. But in any case, the other thing, so some of the few things they talked about in user experience is how some applications don't look alike, which is, you can complain about that, but it's not really conducive. So, when you just try out Linux and review it for kind of the first time, then your comments will be honest, and I guess it's will correspond to how a lot of people will feel when they first try out Linux, but as video content, it won't really be that useful for people who want to try out things. So, for example, if the same problem was faced by someone who's been using Linux for a while and understood the philosophy behind it and liked and enjoyed the philosophy behind it, they would tell you that, of course these two programs look very different, because in Linux we don't have just one standard of doing things. We have a few different types of standards which conform to different sets of philosophies, and this application was written by some group of people, and this other application was written by another group of people. Both of them do a very good job with what they are doing, but they follow different UX philosophies. So unfortunately you have to, understand that these two applications will be slightly different, or even jarringly different. And there are some things that maybe your operating system won't let you do, like you cannot copy from your home folder to a system folder in the graphical file manager. Maybe your graphical file manager won't let you to escalate the privileges, and maybe the official stance of that operating system will be that, well, if you want to do this kind of copying, you have to do it from the command line. And you can complain about that and call it like gatekeeping or whatever, but if that is the best practice that the developers of the operating system are telling you, then I guess don't maybe, try to understand the reason why it is so, and you can just decide that, well, okay, so Linux it's not considered best practice to run graphical applications as root, because all the different complexities that come with having a graphical application that would be able to screw up things in unpredictable ways on your system, so you want to avoid that. So that's why this operating system or this Linux distribution wants you to stick with the command line when you need to do this system administration things. And on Linux, it's just generally, if you want to do this kind of low-level modification of your system, you just have to get familiar with the command line. You don't have to get familiar with the command line if you just use Linux as your everyday, day-to-day operating system, where the only thing that requires privilege escalations would be like the package manager or like the software center or whatever, and you can just hope that because that one application is just written for that purpose, then it's probably written in a good way. And so if not just like a regular person who had a lot of experience with Windows and maybe very technical with Windows and now trying out another operating system that in some aspects try to imitate how Windows works, but in other aspects it's just totally different, they will have a bad experience, and especially if there is no one like guiding them. And I think we should be trying to focus on making videos where we explain why these things are, so why you need to use the command line to do this, and just demystifying the command line especially for people who really want to tinker with their system. I mean, it's amazing that in Windows you are almost like discouraged to tinker with your system in the command line, to be honest. But in any case, so this should be like a better way if we were doing that, not them, I guess. But in general, that's why I wouldn't be really like hyped up when someone who just doesn't really understand Linux but has a big user base, it is not like, oh, now that this big YouTuber will be talking about Linux and they will have such an amazing experience that they will just convert so many people to using Linux. This will never happen. And for me, in the case of me, for example, I don't really use Linux because it's a much better UX than Windows. I don't really care about that part at all. Why I'm using Linux is, of course, because it's the best free and open source operating system that's out there, and I just care about using free and open source software on my personal computer. So even if Linux was like significantly worse than Windows in UX wise, which it isn't, but even if it was, and even if the free software programs were really as much worse than proprietary software as some clueless people are saying, then I would still didn't use the proprietary software. But in general, if there is like one thing that is a little more difficult to do in a free and open source software than how difficult it would be doing in a proprietary software, it's just something that people shouldn't care about. They should just accept that some things are different in different software, but, it's just better because it's open source and free software, and it's just worse because it's proprietary garbage. Even though, if you got used to this one and not this one. So I think this is like the main message that more people have to get. The main message is not like what Linus Sebastian's personal experience with Manjaro, KDE, Plasma Edition was on Linux. And I guess this is all. And What else? One other thing we might, come across is that you can also tell people that, Linux is free and open source software, and there are a lot of community additions to the code base, but Linux is actually worked on by very highly qualified people, and many big corporations are actually funding work on Linux, and some people like my friend RootBSD, for example, would say that it's really like not a good thing about Linux that there are these corporate entities. I would say that, well, it's not just one corporation, it's many different corporations, and anyone can, complain about anyone else's code and figure out if someone's trying to pull a sneaky on all of us. So if Google wanted to put in some spying stuff in the kernel, for example, so they can spy on their users, Microsoft would probably figure it out and, alert them, because when Microsoft is using Linux on their products, they don't want their product, that version of Linux spying on them for Google, for example. So I guess you could say that it is like the best way of utilizing the high investments that these big corporations can do, is that they are also working on the same thing while also keeping an eye on each other, I guess. And if you don't like that, you can also always, of course, go to BSD if you just want a really community-made operating system to be used. But that just pray that no Linus Sebastian will ever try and review OpenBSD on their channel, because that wouldn't end well. Okay, so I think I got everything across that I wanted to. So just to summarize, we should explain Linux, and we should talk about its philosophy. We should explain its apparent flaws by the design choices, and just tell people that, well, even though, that's what they got used to in Windows, that's not what they should expect from an operating system that's built on better principles than that one. And for that, people who just tried out Linux and they just focused on their own quick user experiences after years of using Windows, I guess that's just never going to be advocacy for Linux adoption. So don't get too excited about it, and also don't just go around and blame them for choosing the wrong distribution, because this is what you have to figure out, that whichever distribution they would have chosen, maybe the problems they run into, the user experience issues they have, or the user experience things that they have issues with, would have been different, but something would have been there, whichever distribution they would have tried. So don't just go and, you shouldn't have used Manjaro, that's bad. You should have used Kubuntu or whatever, or Fedora, or I don't know. Or, just Google shitposts that you should have chosen Gentoo or Arch Linux. Anyways, nice Micro Monday. And subscribe, like, comment, and I will see you next time. Bye.